Hey, Foot Clan, before we get started, I want to give you a quick reminder about the Megalodon giveaway.
Megalodon.
Head over to footclangiveaway.com, get in on some sweet autographed gear.
Hey, this is Willie Snead with the New Orleans Saints, and you're listening to the Fantasy Footballers Podcast.
Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers Podcast, coming to you from the FantasyJocks.com studios with your hosts, Andy Holloway, Jason Moore, and Mike Wright.
Welcome into a verified Wednesday morning.
Full verified, 100%.
Mike is not here. Jason and Andy are. We are the Fantasy Footballers, and we're back again. And I'm telling you right now, this might be the most important episode you listen to
Ever.
until the next one.
Well,
No,
right.
for real. This is a very important episode. Look, what we're doing on the show today is we have pulled out the placemats, and we're setting the table for the fantasy playoffs.
That's right. People have been asking for this. They've been saying, how do you feel about certain players for the playoff schedule, the upcoming, who are you really wanting for that playoff stretch? Who are you avoiding? Things like that. And we'll give a nice taste. We'll put the salt and all the seasonings out.
Yeah, and you make the decision on what you want to eat.
Absolutely.
This show is all about giving you information how to play, not just a bunch of rankings, right? We could come on here and say, keep, trade, cut today, but the reality is you don't look at fantasy players now and just say what they've done in the past and make an arbitrary decision. You have to factor in all of the matchups that are coming up, whether you're trying to fight to get into the playoffs or back in the playoff hunt, or whether you are now hopefully firmly secure in the playoffs and setting your lineup, getting it ready for weeks 14, 15, and 16. And so we are going to break down positional teams that have great matchups at each position for the playoffs, teams that have bad matchups. We're getting into that today. We have Pump the Brakes. We have a bunch of good articles on the website that you can add into your brain, like our snap count observation article that's out there, and some FanDuel information is on the website as well, which is thefantasyfootballers.com. Now, look, before we get into Pump the Brakes, it's important that we take a quick look at an important issue going on in this country. Is Mike verified?
Sometimes it's hard to check.
Right.
Sometimes
We don't broadcast live.
I have to look it up, and I don't know where to find it. But
One of our listeners does.
oh my goodness, whoever you are out there in the world who has, the Foot Clan always just they top themselves. They just constantly they're doing better than the last one. You can now go to ismikeverified.com and find out.
Brad Coates.
Oh, Brad Coates.
Brad Coates is the one that put that together. A lot of really good information on the website. If you go to ismikeverified.com.
Is Mike verified? Let me look in.
Is he?
Nope. Don't trust a word he says.
Don't trust a word he says. That's at this point, how can you?
I don't even know if it's him.
How can you? So, all right, that's good. I'm glad we took care of that. It's Wednesday, which means it's time for
O'Reilly.
Auto Parts.
Ow!
We two-manned it.
We did. I almost forgot.
You did. Welcome to Pump the Brakes with O'Reilly. We do this every Wednesday. Talk about some players you need to be aware of. Maybe they had a very good week. Maybe you're excited about them, and we're saying, whoa, Nelly.
Pump those brakes.
Pump those brakes. Jason, who's your Pump the Brakes candidate this week?
My candidate this week is a guy who is very hot and cold throughout most seasons, Eli Manning. And if you look at the last 2 weeks, well, he's been rather hot. Eli Manning is now at the point where people are going to say, I can trust him. I can play him. He's thrown 7 touchdowns in 2 weeks. And I'm saying, whoa.
You're worried about it.
Pump them brakes. Just pump them brakes.
Okay.
Because this week he has what looks like a kind of juicy matchup. He's playing against Chicago. Chicago is a terrible albatross of a team right now, and they just lost Alshon Jeffrey. They're in shambles. So New York, who is favored by 7 according to Vegas, that seems to me to be a recipe for play Eli Manning, or at least you can make that argument. The reality is this. the Giants are winning right now because of their defense. Chicago actually has a pretty good defense. It's their offense that is atrocious. This game should be a more low-scoring game, and it's a game that Eli Manning could, throw a couple picks here. So I don't expect, him to continue the pace of 3.5 touchdowns a game over the last 2. And if you're saying, hey, I'm going to pick him up and play him, I think you're going to be, think you're going to have the quarterback 15, and that doesn't usually win your week.
All right, my pump the brakes is going to be a combination. It's going to be the Baltimore passing game in general, which really for fantasy owners focuses on Steve Smith Sr. and Mike Wallace. Look, it's been an off year for Joe Flacco.
Yeah.
And the illusion that is playing Cleveland does not right your ship for the entire year. You mix that with what I deem the worst schedule for fantasy wide receivers in the playoffs. Week 14 at New England. Week 15, Philly. Week 16 at Pittsburgh. If you go through 17, it's at Cincinnati. That's 3 out of 4 of the top 10 defenses against passing fantasy points given up to wide receivers. And so, to me, as much as I respect Steve Smith and enjoy the 95-yard touchdowns from Mike Wallace, I don't think you can count on it. I think you need to pump the brakes after this Cleveland extravaganza, which everybody has.
Yeah, it's
you
funny.
don't get to play Cleveland 4 times.
My pump the brakes was almost Ben Roethlisberger, because if you think about it, he's going on the road and he's lost a lot of weapons. Look, Marcus Wheaton, he's got the shoulder injury.
I thought you said weapons.
Yeah,
not Wheaton's.
He's gone. Sammie Coates broke an extra finger because he just
how do you do that?
Brittle hands. So he's gone. Darius Hayward-Bay. Okay, now he's possibly going to miss. So you've got Big Ben going on the road, and you've got missing weapons. I was going to say, hey, look, this is another possible Big Ben trap game, and then I realized, man,
they play Cleveland.
He's going to be just fine.
8.5-point favorites in Cleveland.
Joe Flacco,
to add to that,
was terrible last week, and he was like a top 5 fantasy player.
All right, we're going to get into the news. Before we do that, you can keep up with everything going on with this show on Twitter at the FF Ballers. Make sure you head over there and follow us. You can follow me at Andy Holloway, follow Jason at JasonFFL, and followed the unverified swine at FF Hitman.
Yeah, and so, that completes the Pump the Brakes.
That's right. That was Pump the Brakes with O'Reilly Auto Parts. Better parts. Better prices
every day. I wanted to say it with you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. All right, we're going to go ahead and break down the news before we get into this important playoff segment.
News and notes from around the league.
Now, as much as I'd love to pretend Mike doesn't exist, with the news that broke yesterday,
big news,
Christine Michael was waived.
He's gone.
It's full circle here again for Christine Michael. Nothing to do with an off-the-field issue is what they claim. What I've heard, well, there's a couple angles here. First of all, we're going to take you live to, let's handle this first. We called Mike. Mike is at Disneyland with his family and the grandparents.
But how do you not, after all of Mike's love for Chris and Michael, how do you not get Mike to weigh in? People wanted to know Mike's opinion on Chris and Michael getting cut.
He's loved Chris and Michael. So we called him, we recorded the conversation, and here's what we got.
Let me say something. Ron, let me say something.
He wasn't happy.
No.
He was disappointed.
Yeah.
I'd go so far as upset.
You could say he was in a glass case of emotion.
Yeah. So Mike wasn't happy. Here's my take on this. First thing it says, Prosise and Rawls. They're completely comfortable moving forward with him. Clearly, this is on paper now.
Yes, Rawls is absolutely healthy and ready to go, or you don't cut Kristen Michael.
The second thing I've heard about this is that Kristen Michael somehow couldn't pick up or understand or get the offense in the way that they wanted to, be able to run the offense and have confidence in him in that role. To me, now, I've been saying this for weeks. I don't know if you believe me, Jason, but I think Thomas Rawls is going to win people playoff fantasy championships. Foot Clan titles will be the result of Thomas Rawls. Now, the big question for fantasy owners now with this news is Rawls or Prosise this week? Because this is his first week back. Rawls' first week back. Mind you, he basically, he came back briefly at the beginning of the year and really, didn't even get into the swing of things before he got hurt again.
This week, I would be more confident playing Prosise. I think really it was.
I think that's the general thought.
I think Prosise was what he showed last week. It has as much to do with them being able to let Christine Michael go as Rawls' health, because they say, well, we don't even need him without Rawls.
17 for 66.
Yeah. So and they've got Alex
7
Collins
receptions.
behind them.
Alex Collins. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
I thought you said Alex Rawls.
Nope.
His
I said
brother.
Alex Collins. And the one caveat I will put, especially on today's show, today we're going to be talking about the playoff matchups. The one reason I would hesitate to say that Rawls is going to win you your fantasy playoffs is, he's got the Green Bay rushing defense, the LA Rams, and Arizona. Those are just three matchups I'm not looking forward to from the running back position.
Well, and sure, I think that's fair. And for clarity, I did not say he will. I said he's one of those guys that could. Because if you didn't have a fantasy running back, we talk about all these depth plays and guys you can sign, the Robert Kellys of the world.
Right.
We have to remember, Thomas Rawls was the best fantasy running back in football.
Number one.
Over the last half of the season last year.
Yeah.
So when you get that back and you weren't expecting to get it back, that's a difference maker.
Yep.
All right, Tony Romo held an emotional press conference yesterday. He supported Dak Prescott as the starting quarterback. Honestly, I felt terrible for him. And he read right off of a piece of paper.
Oh,
I mean, he couldn't handle it.
I was so impressed, man. I mean, it takes a lot to be a true, legitimate superstar and humble yourself and back up what you've been saying your whole career, which is I need to do what's best for the team, not just what's best for the team and me. And I was impressed by it. I think the young ones out there could follow the example, the humility, the reality. He's living in reality as opposed to in his own little celebrity bubble. I was just thoroughly impressed.
What's the fantasy implications?
Fantasy implications are that Dak Prescott is definitely the starter for sure. We already knew that. And I have been saying, he was almost my rising star of the week because I trust him for fantasy. I think he is productive from a statistical, pad the box score capability.
All right, Jared Goff is going to make his first start this week.
Really?
Yeah, aren't you excited?
Oh, man, I'm, yeah.
I would sign the Dolphins defense immediately.
That's the biggest piece of this. The Dolphins are probably going to be my number one ranked D. Jared Goff, there's a reason he hasn't been able to get on the field yet. I will be...
It took a Case Keenum to get him on.
Thoroughly enjoying watching the game. I guess as, we live in Arizona, so this is great news.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like Goff. I never have. I wonder what he'll be able to do.
Like as a person?
Well, no, as a player.
Okay.
As a player. I just have never bought in. I think we saw in the preseason what he has. We'll see, though. He's probably better than Keenum, but probably not this week.
Yeah.
All right. Mike Tomlin said Sammie Coates is dealing with the double broken finger situation after the last two gooses. I would cut him.
Absolutely. I don't think you can trust Sammie Coates. You can't start him right now. And now that he's got the additional broken finger, what do you hold now hope for?
Nothing. And Blair Walsh, you burst onto the scene, you burned bright, and now you're gone. Blair Walsh was cut, released by the Vikings after missing an extra point.
The life of a kicker.
It's a rough world, man.
I tweeted out, that he definitely needed to be cut. I'm happy he's gone, but there's always a part of me that feels bad for kickers that just, hey, you don't perform, you are gone, like way quicker than most other positions. And then all the Minnesota people tweeted and said, no remorse, no hard feeling.
Well,
get out.
Yeah, there were some. If you remember the playoffs last year, it wasn't pretty. And the one thing I'll say is you had Mason Crosby struggle for like 2 years in Green Bay, and they stuck through with him, and now he's great again. So I wouldn't doubt seeing a big leg like Blair Walsh end up back in the league, but not on Minnesota. So we're moving on.
Playoffs?
We're talking playoffs.
Playoffs? You kidding me? Playoffs?
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What position do we start with?
I think you start at the top with the quarterbacks.
All right, so what we did is we took a look at we basically ranked all the teams according to fantasy points per game given up to the quarterbacks, laid out their playoff schedules, and so we wanted to give you kind of what we see as the best playoff schedules for quarterbacks, the worst playoff schedules for quarterbacks. This will affect the way you trade, the way you sign guys, and the caveat here is that this is a piece of a puzzle. This is not the ultimatum. This doesn't mean that because Tyrod Taylor has a good playoff schedule that you go out and you play him over Tom Brady. We're not saying that.
Who has a bad playoff schedule.
Who has a bad playoff schedule.
Exactly right. We are most certainly not saying that, but it is important. If you look at last year, the Kirk Cousins playoff schedule was great. He was made because he had great matchups, and we knew, hey, this is a juicy matchup. You should start him. You did start him. You won your championship. That's what we're looking for this year. Are those kind of guys that kind of have the combination of talent and matchup. I'm a little bit scared of giving the bad playoff schedule matchups because too often people then overvalue that. And so this is kind of our caveat of saying don't overvalue matchups. Just have that be the piece of the puzzle.
And if you were going to overvalue, I'd rather you overvalue on the better QB schedule side and stream those guys than I would you overreact. I mean, look at Drew Brees took on Denver, right? That's a bad playoff matchup. Took him on this last week, scored 30 points.
Well, look, our three worst, since we're talking quarterbacks, let's just get into it, right? The three worst matchups
on paper
for quarterbacks are three great quarterbacks.
Aaron Rodgers,
Tom Brady, and Russell Wilson.
So Rodgers has Seattle, Chicago, Minnesota, and Brady has Baltimore, Denver, the Jets. Brady's schedule really doesn't, even though on paper he ranks that way, it doesn't scare me nearly as much as Aaron Rodgers does.
I completely agree.
Aaron Rodgers playing Seattle and then the divisional game at Chicago and then Minnesota. That's a tough run.
Yeah, Tom Brady, look, a lot of people, myself included, found better options than playing Drew Brees against Denver this last week, and Drew Brees was absolutely fine. And that's not the norm, but Drew Brees is not the norm, and Tom Brady is not the norm. So his schedule here, obviously, Week 16 against the Jets, that's great. Tom Brady can carve up the Jets' weak secondary. Baltimore is really just highly ranked for that first week because they're a low-scoring team. And I'm not really scared off of Tom Brady.
Now, here's what I'm going to ask you, though. Drew Brees is the second best schedule for a fantasy quarterback for the playoffs. Rivers has 3+ matchups facing Carolina, Oakland, and Cleveland. I think people are going to win championships with Phillip Rivers this year, and we said it a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, we've been on Phillip for a while. He is the guy that I would prefer to have going into the playoffs.
But Brees has Tampa twice, Tampa Bay.
Yes.
And if I were an Aaron Rodgers owner and I was securing the playoffs, there's no question in my mind I would be trying to trade Aaron Rodgers in a deal for Drew Brees.
Oh, for sure. I mean, if I was to have to make a bet to say, okay, fantasy playoffs week 14, 15, 16 between Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers, I would give odds.
Yeah. So other fantasy quarterbacks with plus matchups for weeks 14, 15, and 16. We talked about Rivers and Brees. Jameis Winston has New Orleans twice and Dallas in the middle. It's a good run for Winston. You've been riding him probably for a few weeks now because the second half schedule was so much better. Matt Ryan, Dak Prescott.
Those two guys both have good overall playoff
15
schedules.
and 16 are better for both of them.
Yeah, and they have a hard week 1.
Both on the road.
Both against decently good defenses in the LA Rams. That's who Matt Ryan's playing in week 1. And then Dak Prescott will be playing against the Giants, whose secondary is much improved. Pass rush looks pretty good. I would trust I think I would trust either one of those guys in those games. I wouldn't necessarily sit them, but there are better options.
You're just talking about Week 14.
Yes, just Week 14. Week 15 and 16 for Matt Ryan and Dak Prescott are as green as it gets.
Colin Kaepernick, Tyrod Taylor, and Derek Carr are the last three that I want to mention in the best quarterback schedules for Week 14 through 16. I've told you Kaepernick is one of those guys that he was my rising star because of his playoff schedule. The Jets in Atlanta for weeks 14 and 15. Tyrod Taylor I mean, I really like his schedule and the way he's been playing. Pittsburgh and Cleveland for week 14 and 15, another great streaming option. And then, Derek Carr, Kansas City, San Diego, and Indianapolis. I'm okay with it. I think, I think you could probably do better than Derek Carr, but he's managed to. Those are a couple tough divisional games. I don't mind it.
Yeah, and the last name that I would throw out there for fantasy relevance in the playoffs, I always think the most important week is week 1 of the playoffs, right?
Sure.
If you know you're going to get in the playoffs, focus on that first week because you don't get to the second if you don't win the first. And Andy Dalton, while he doesn't have a great matchup throughout the playoffs, he plays Cleveland that first week. So if you've got
if you're a Matt Ryan owner,
exactly, Matt Ryan, Dak Prescott, you got those two guys who've got that hard week 1 and the great week 2 and 3 in the playoffs, then pair Andy Dalton with Matt Ryan or Dak Prescott, and I love your entire fantasy playoffs.
All right. Before we finish up on the quarterbacks and talk about a few of these bad matchups, maybe guys you just want to stay away from and not be tempted to play, I do want to thank today's sponsor of the show, good friends over at Harry's. Thank you for sponsoring this podcast. We love Harry's. What I love is how comfortable the shave is and the fact that, unlike other brands, Harry's, they come out with new models. I actually just got the latest Harry's razor model. They come out with all these new features. They make them better. They improve them, but they don't raise the prices. The prices stay exactly the same with Harry's. Now they have a trimmer blade. Now they have a lubricating strip on there. They have these are 5-blade razors that have a softer flex hinge, but the price hasn't gone up. They're still just $2 a blade compared to $4 that you'd pay for the other guys at the drugstore. That's why we like Harry's. That's why we've been talking about them for a long time. Don't forget, when we first talked about them, we reminded you, they have their own factory in Germany where they make these blades, so that's why they can make them high quality and at a low cost. So Harry's is so confident in the quality of these blades, guys, that they will send you a free trial set. Comes with a razor, a 5-blade cartridge, and shaving gel. You don't have to pay anything but shipping. So if you want to try them out, you want to give them a shot, special offer for the fans of this show. Enter the code footballers at checkout. Get a post-shave balm for free on top of all of that. So go to harrys.com right now and enter the code footballers at checkout to claim your free trial set and post-shave balm. That's harrys.com, code footballers.
Yeah, we also definitely want to make sure everyone always knows about Pristine Auction, the best, the only place to get authentic signed,
what's going on over there today?
Incredible merchandise. Here's what's going on. We've been seeing tweet after tweet pictures of people getting stuff from Pristine Auction, thanking us for showing them Pristine Auction, saying they can't believe what they got, showing us pictures of their living rooms. And it's like, I made the comment a week or two ago about the fact that it's like, it's the new art, right? Like, maybe in the olden days, you'd go through and you'd see these extravagant pictures and paintings.
Before things were verified.
Right. And now it's like you walk into these living rooms or you walk into your awesome man cave or whatever it is, and you just have these showpieces. And then I was looking around on Pristine Auction. You know what I found out? They actually have legitimate signed art as well. Like I was signed Salvador Dali. They've got everything over there. So whatever you think, if you're like, I need to up my living room, my showpiece, go to Pristine Auction, Pristine auction.com, make a free account, bid on stuff that's free, tweet us when you win it, and make sure you let them know that the Fantasy Footballer sent you.
All right, some other bad schedules for the playoffs. Russell Wilson, he takes on Green Bay, the Rams, in Arizona. I don't think many people are tempted to play Tannehill. He has a tough one. The other ones, just stay away from Blake Bortles overall. You probably already are, but he's got Minnesota and Houston.
All right,
what do you think of Andrew Luck, though?
Because
Andrew Luck right now, he's got his first 2 playoff matchups are against teams that are not giving it up to fantasy quarterbacks. Now, Andrew Luck has shown a capacity to usurp those rankings when he faces them. But he does play Houston, and then he plays Minnesota in those first 2 weeks before he takes on that juicy, maybe championship-winning Oakland matchup in Week 16. But what do you do with Andrew Luck? What would your mindset be if you have Andrew Luck on your team? You probably just start him, don't you?
If I have Andrew Luck on my team by the time that the playoffs roll around, I am probably going to start him. There are certainly, he won't be my number 1 ranked quarterback. So, if you happen to have him and Phillip Rivers, then I'd start Phillip Rivers over some of those matchups because you've got the combination of a really good quarterback, good offense with the matchup. if I've got him now and I have the ability to make a move, very similar to what you were saying with Aaron Rodgers, I would start at the top and start looking at, like, can I get a Drew Brees for Andrew Luck plus, a throwaway something, or maybe just straight across, if the other person buys into the name of Andrew Luck a little bit more.
Buys into the beard. Buys
into the good luck. But I think you're right. I'm going to go ahead and start him if I've got him, more than likely. But you need to realize that the playoff schedule, when you start out with Houston and Minnesota, it's going to be I hope you've got a good team behind him.
You're going to probably cap your upside at a minimum. Even if Luck gives you a good performance, don't you want to start a guy that has the potential to go 30, 40 points and win you a week?
He has the potential, right, to keep up with anyone. You got a great defense, he's going to keep up with them. The problem with Minnesota and Houston specifically is that they've got bad offenses. Right? So there's no way this turns into a 30-30 type of game, because Houston and Minnesota don't have the capability to score those points unless their defense is scoring them.
All right, let's turn over to the running back position, a position that is heavily impacted by these matchups, obviously. Case in point, 2 weeks ago, Mark Ingram had the pleasure of going up against the San Francisco run defense, puts up 15 for 158 and a touchdown, 34 fantasy points in our league. Follow it up a week. It's Denver, 11 for 50. It's even a good yard per carry, but no touchdown, not a lot of scoring given up, and he only scores 8 fantasy points. And so we want to outline a few of the plus matchups, especially, almost all these guys we're going to mention for the better RB schedules are guys that have a great week 14. And that's the nice thing, because if you go and get these players, not only are they the best for weeks 14, 15, 16, but they all aren't going to hurt you in week 1, just about. Now, there are some obvious guys that you're not necessarily going to.
We don't even need to bring them up. You're not going to
bench them. Those are the Gordons of the world.
LaShawn McCoy.
Sure, McCoy has a great schedule. But here's some to pay attention to. The backfield, we've talked a lot about Cleveland today and how wonderful it is to play against them. The backfield in Cincinnati has the third best playoff schedule for running backs. They faced Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and then Houston.
Houston's not that great, but when you start off with Cleveland.
Well, and Houston's in the middle of the pack against the run.
Yeah.
So Hill and Bernard, both of those guys, both of them can probably be acquired cheap too. So if you're talking about some running back insurance on your team, those guys have a great matchup in week 14. Who sticks out to you as the big guys? You got Jonathan Stewart, has the second best against the run, San Diego, Washington, Atlanta. You have the Forte-Powell combination. Again, Powell's a guy you could probably go snag on the cheap.
Yeah, definitely. The guy that I have really liked his playoff schedule for a while, it's possible you could still acquire him as well, but he's more expensive because he's got a big name, is Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley, look, in that second playoff week, he's going to go up against Seattle in Seattle. That's terrible. So that might hurt you too much. Maybe it's not worth the investment. But you sandwich that game with Atlanta at home and San Francisco at home. You're telling me Todd Gurley?
It doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah, I mean that's what you're looking for. So
and the potential for Goff to change the offense. Maybe not. He doesn't set the world on fire, but he changes it. Opens
maybe you
something
have
up.
to have a defender back for a deep shot, and you can't just have everybody up against the box. Other
up
guys
against it, huh?
Up against
just
it,
up against the box.
We've talked. It's very, very similar to Todd Gurley. We've talked about it for a while, which is Doug Martin. Now, Doug Martin, in the middle of the fantasy playoffs, has Dallas in Dallas. That's not a great matchup, but he's sandwiched with 2 games against New Orleans, which is as good as it gets. So, who would you like in that second week of the playoffs that would pair nicely? The hard thing here with quarterbacks, you can pair them, right? You can go out and find waiver pickups. You can carry 2.
That's why I like Hill and Bernard, because they get to take on Pittsburgh's run defense, which has been terrible. Pittsburgh right now is giving up the 3rd most points to fantasy running backs in 22.8 points per game. Hill and Bernard, you can get one of those guys. If you need to protect yourself against that tough matchup, you can roll out a Hill or Bernard against Pittsburgh in week 15, divisional game, a very porous defense for Pittsburgh on the ground. That's one of the teams I'd consider.
I think my 2 favorite schedules overall are probably Jonathan Stewart's going San Diego, Washington, Atlanta. I've got really no fears in that. And I'll also throw out Spencer Ware, because while Tennessee
I love it too. Yeah.
in the second week is they've been okay at their running D. They don't scare me quite as much, especially for a guy who catches the ball like Spencer Ware does. So Oakland, Tennessee, and Denver is actually a plus matchup on the ground. Spencer Ware and Jonathan Stewart are those guys I think you can acquire, or if you can have some confidence in them going forward.
Yeah. Yep, I agree. Another note here: Ingram and Hightower both have the Tampa Bay sandwich, but Arizona is right in the middle of that. And if you have a backfield that is sharing carries, you saw this last week against Denver. It wasn't a good mix. Arizona's number one when it comes to the least amount of points given up against fantasy running backs. So you need to keep that in mind. They're giving up 11 points per game, just over 11. Compare that to San Francisco, who's given up 28. That's a big disparity. So on the other end of the spectrum, you have some matchups, some players, some guys that do not have good-looking schedules. The one that jumps out to me, it's a triple red across the board. It's the Rob Kelly experiment. Okay, he has to go to Philly, then Carolina, then Chicago. 3 really, really good run defenses. Right now, Philly and Chicago's the 3rd against the run, Carolina 4th, and Philly is looking at number 6. So I don't think you can lean on Kelly in the playoffs at all.
No, it's going to be difficult to run against that run of matchups and succeed throughout the playoffs when you're playing other great fantasy teams. What's interesting to me is there's a lot of question mark guys, a lot of waiver type of guys right now that people are picking up, they're interested in, and all of them I feel like have pretty bad fantasy playoff schedules. So you bring up Rob Kelly, right? A lot of people, the 2 guys that people are picking up right now, James Starks and Thomas Rawls. Those guys, James Starks, Seattle, Chicago, and Minnesota. That's a really bad schedule for a running back. And then, I mentioned it just a few minutes ago with Rawls and Prosise at Green Bay, then the LA Rams and Arizona. If Rawls comes back to his form last year, he was matchup proof. He can run on anybody. But we haven't seen him come back. We saw him try early in the season, and he didn't look the same.
I think the point you're making, though, is that among the worst situations for running backs, there are a ton of the running back rotation situations, whether it is the Prosise Rawls, the Kelly Thompson, the Jennings-Perkins. They have 3 red matchups, Dallas, Detroit, Philly. Ivory and Yeldon, not that you want to start either of them, but now I'm telling you don't. Please don't. Minnesota, Houston, Tennessee.
A lot of people are like, well, what do I do with Ivory? Do I hold on to him because he's had a good game since the offensive coordinator?
Put him in a small boat, push him out to sea.
Yeah, and then take that arrow, put it on fire.
Come on.
And then you launch it.
Come on.
Well, you're probably going to miss anyways.
You'll get a fine if you do the arrow.
I'm gonna get a fine.
Brandon Cooks can't do the arrow.
You got the same thing with Chicago with Howard and Langford. Howard's injury. Detroit, their running defense has actually been okay because their pass defense is so bad.
Sure.
The usually running backs don't put up many fantasy points. Green Bay.
Let's remember, when we say their defense has been okay, this is 100% in the context of what they've given up to running backs.
Fantasy.
It doesn't mean that they are a great defense. It means that they don't generally give it up to running backs. In Detroit's case, it's because they give it all up to the wide receivers. People don't have to run. So let's move on to the wide receiver position, and let's talk about, sometimes these are the most interesting because you can really, you probably got a 1, right? You're in the playoffs. You probably have a wide receiver 1 you love. You might have a 2 you love, but you don't know who to flex. And you don't know what player you can roll out there, and matchups make a big difference. You don't want your fantasy wide receivers going up against Denver and Minnesota or Houston. Those guys are giving up 13, 15, and 16 points respectively to fantasy wide receivers. And so let's talk about some of the best schedules. This is the best case of setting the table for you as a fantasy owner and letting you decide which matchups you like the most, because you start at the top. The best situation for any set of wide receivers looks to me like San Diego, and I still don't know which guy I'd want. It looks like, Tyrell Williams, you should pick him up. If you have time to grab him still, he should be on your team. But they have Carolina, Oakland, and Cleveland.
All 3 great schedules for wide receivers.
And we already told you we love Phillip Rivers.
Yeah, it makes sense. If Travis Benjamin stays injured, he's getting more counsel on his injury. If he is gone, then Tyrell Williams is going to be, I think, heavily owned in championship rosters. Unbelievably, he's still available in like 20% of leagues. And that just shows that
After this morning,
I haven't checked it this morning.
you're saying with the that was yesterday.
Yeah, and so but what it does show you is that his value is not perceived to be very high. So if your trade deadline has not passed, then you can probably acquire him as almost a throw-in on another
He's
deal.
still 30% available on ESPN.
Yeah, this morning. So that's nuts. If he's out there, definitely pick him up.
Yeah, he's had a number of good weeks. 4 out of the last 6 weeks, 20, 17, 15, 23.
You all right there?
I think I'm okay. All right, so it's not a surprise. Julio Jones has a really good matchup. You're not benching Julio Jones under any circumstance, but maybe it means in a deeper league you take a flyer on a Taylor Gabriel who has San Francisco, Carolina in week 15, 16. Carolina has a very good fantasy schedule, so maybe if you're worried about Kelvin Benjamin, you can kind of let that be the tiebreaker on whether he can be rolled out there for you with confidence. The first couple weeks here, I want to know this because one of the better schedules, Jason, is for Brandon Marshall against San Francisco, Miami in the first 2 weeks. But, I mean, what do you even do right now with them?
I think
Is that just like fool's gold, seeing that schedule?
You hold a vigil for Ryan Fitzpatrick, and you hope that he gets his life in order and that things
And he can come back and start.
and that he can be the starter and that he can be okay because you're not getting anything done with Bryce Petty in there.
You don't want Christian Hackenberg?
Sure. I mean, give him to me. What's the worst you can do?
Very good playoff matchups for Des Bryant and the Cowboys wide receivers. For the Detroit wide receivers, the very asleep Marvin Jones and the suddenly awake Golden Tate. I've been asked this question a bunch of times. I want to pose it to you right now, Jason. Rest of season, Tate or Marvin Jones? They have Chicago, New York, and Dallas in the fantasy playoffs.
With those specific teams, I'm going to go with Tate because I still think that Marvin Jones is considered by other teams as the one that you need to lock down. I think they're putting their best defender on.
And he's not being able to.
He's not been able to beat.
Overcome it.
Right, exactly. And when I look at those teams, you've got a couple really good, like New York. They've got their new acquisition, Jennings, has been great. And so I think he's going to be able to lock Jones down, and Tate might have a little bit more room to run.
My answer has kind of been Tate in half-point and full-point leagues, thinking about Jones in standard leagues.
I'll be really honest. I don't especially want either of them. I don't want to rely on either guy because the chance of me being able to rely for 3 consecutive weeks on either one of those guys is such a crapshoot that I would rather go to other options personally.
So you brought up earlier if Travis Benjamin doesn't come back, how much you like Tyrell Williams. Well, if Deshaun Jackson can't get back on the field, how high do you move up Jamison Crowder with a playoff schedule of Philly, Carolina, and Chicago? 2/3 of those are the worst against fantasy wide receivers. Without Djax on the field, do you bump up everybody there? Do you bump up Crowder and Garcon and Jordan Reed and Vernon Davis?
I don't bump up everybody, but Crowder is the guy to me that is a locked and loaded. You know who he is reminding me of? Michael Crabtree. He's a guy that you just don't think is spectacular. You don't see him as this. He's going down and getting 60-yard bombs. He's not this prototypical wide receiver 1.
He's not the Lamborghini.
But he is so consistent with points that if you put him as your wide receiver 2, you are happy every single week. He gets enough targets, enough receptions, enough red zone looks, enough touchdowns to where it's like, oh, yeah, I'm so glad I've got him, and I don't have this up and down terribleness of like a Marvin Jones or a Golden Tate where, hey, I'm so happy they helped me win this week. Also, they helped me lose the next week. That doesn't get it done in the playoffs. In the playoffs, you have to win every single week or you're done.
Yeah, I completely agree. And another great lineup, New Orleans, we've talked about that Tampa Bay sandwich they have. So that means you have to lean on either a Brandon Cooks or a Willie Snead or a Michael Thomas. To me, it's Thomas. I would say one of my potential pump the brakes was Willie Snead because he put in the 2 touchdowns this week, but all my money's on Thomas. for those two Tampa matchups. And to be honest with you, I think Thomas, Patrick Peterson is going to be on Brandon Cooks.
Yeah.
In fact, today, news just broke that Patrick Peterson will be shadowing the entire game, Stefon Diggs, this week.
That was what my expectation was already.
And so if he's shadowing Cooks, I think Thomas for Tampa, Arizona, Tampa, it doesn't get a lot better than that. And Snead too, could have some good games right there. So let's flip it over to the worst schedules. Maybe we'll call this the final nail in the Hopkins coffin here, okay? Houston has the second worst, maybe the worst, schedule in the playoffs for fantasy wide receivers. Vontae Davis in Indianapolis. Hopkins has to go match up there. He has to match up with Ramsey in Jacksonville, and then he has to go to Cincinnati or play Cincinnati. Those are three of the teams that give up the least of fantasy wide receivers. So DeAndre Hopkins, can you release him?
No.
Can you release DeAndre Hopkins?
No.
What if your trade deadline's over?
If your trade deadline is over, I am not releasing DeAndre Hopkins because his talent is extraordinarily elite.
How many points is that talent worth lately? Or all year, I mean. Sorry.
Look, if you are in a league that has 0 bench spots, then I agree. You can go ahead and cut him. But if I have to have people filling up bench spots, I am happy to have that be DeAndre Hopkins.
Don't you want your opponent to take him and play him against you?
Sure, but my point is playing a bench role. What do you want more than if they can figure it out?
What do you mean a bench role? You don't get
my point
playing
is
a bench role doesn't even make any sense.
No, what? Yes, it does.
Playing a bench role?
Yes. Here's what I mean by playing a bench role from a fantasy football perspective.
What? Somebody you can emergency throw in and not feel bad about?
No, someone who can emerge as a legitimate, important fantasy option while he's on my bench. I grabbed the Alfred Morris, and he's playing a role for me as a potential, blow-up guy. DeAndre Hopkins, if he gets his groove together with Brock Osweiler, or they just say, hey, stop being stupid, just constantly throw to Hopkins. Hopkins is too talented.
I understand that, and I'm mostly just
just
arguing with you for fun. But at some point, right? This is not Allen Robinson who's perked up. This is the 35th ranked wide receiver right now. This is a guy who's had, despite the catches, he scored 3 touchdowns on the year. He's been single digits in 5 weeks, and his last 3 weeks have been bad.
I completely agree. He would have been, in fact, we talked before the
but
show, he would have been my pump the brakes.
I would not drop him.
He would have been my pump the brakes if he, had any speed to him at all, but he doesn't. Everyone's brakes are already pumped on him. I will say this, though. He's got 3 red matchups in Indianapolis, Jacksonville, and Cincinnati, but those 3 teams specifically do not strike me as like they haven't given up fantasy points to wide receivers much this year. But I don't see anything in their defenses or in their offenses from a game flow standpoint that say at the end of the season those 3 will definitely stick as red matchups.
Well, that makes sense that you would say that because you are saying that Hopkins is not going to stick as a horrible fantasy player like he's been. So you believe in the hope. You're a hopeful man today.
I'm a hopeful man.
I think Hopkins could get people to the playoffs with Oakland, San Diego, Green Bay.
Okay,
I'm not sure he's going to.
Let me argue this. What if Brock Osweiler blows his knee out this week?
Sure.
Honestly, I think Hopkins then becomes a great fantasy option.
Didn't I just say you were a man of hope?
I don't want to hope for that, but
how in the world are you going to hang that wallpaper if his knee goes out? How do you do that?
He's got to have a healthy knee brace.
All right, you heard me pump the brakes on Jordy Nelson. I kind of regret it earlier in the year, but I still stand by the fact this playoff schedule is brutal. It's Seattle and Minnesota with Chicago in the middle, which I love, but it's in Chicago. But, I mean, Week 14 against Seattle, there is a 100% cap on wide receivers against that Seattle offense.
Yeah. So. And it's probably the cap is going to be brought down the hardest on Jordy.
Very bad Week 14. So that first playoff week, Hilton has a tough matchup. Houston, we know how they've been against fantasy wide receivers. You have Allen Robinson with Minnesota and Houston those first 2 weeks. We already said stay away from Bortles. I'm not really worried about Stefon Diggs despite the matchup looking bad. So I'm not going to put him on full alert here just because, man, the target numbers. What do we say? He broke his own target record 3 consecutive weeks.
Can he make it a 4th?
What other is there anybody else you want to talk about on the bad side of things? I mean,
I think the two teams that stick out to me as guys I want to avoid would be Indianapolis and Jacksonville. The Hilton, the Moncrief, the Allen Robinson, and probably no one else there, because both of them play Houston and Minnesota, just in opposite orders. And those, I don't see a huge upside for any player in all four of those games.
So we're going to move to tight ends. One of the interesting things about tight ends is that I find these trends to be some of the most consistent trends to take place. You know, you had a couple years ago, Arizona was the worst against fantasy tight ends. Everybody that came in put up numbers. If you want to know the disparity, okay, the fantasy points per game average given up to tight ends, Arizona and Baltimore, 2 and 3 points is what they average given up. You go to the other end of the spectrum, Cleveland and Detroit are giving up almost 12 points a game to the tight end position. So there's a very wide gap there.
And
obviously, it matters a little bit about what tight ends you're playing, but we're trying, the barfy tight ends, as we call them, you're making a decision, maybe more than any other position than quarterback, on matchup and which guy you can stream this week. And so this is, I think, tight ends, maybe they get pushed aside a little bit. This might be the most important thing we talk about today, because if you can outscore your opponent's tight end by a significant margin, you can make up for a lot of problems elsewhere. The best tight end schedules week 14 to 16. Jason, what's the headliner for you?
The headliner for me would probably be Cameron Brate. He has the second best matchup, but he is all alone. The best matchup right now belongs, not surprisingly, to Antonio Gates and Hunter Henry. But because they're sharing, you don't always know who's going to get it. Cameron Brate, to me, he's got the double New Orleans matchup, but Dallas in the middle is actually, Dallas has struggled against the tight end this year as well. 8 per game. So I think Cameron Brate, his playoff matchup looks as good as anyone's. His talent on the field has impressed me. And, I mean, right now he's on a streak of 3 games in a row with a touchdown. He's available still in the majority of leagues. He's a guy that I would hold on to.
The one I like a lot is Zach Miller. With Alshon Jeffrey leaving for 4 games, Zach Miller gets to walk into the playoffs against Detroit and Green Bay. Detroit is the worst in the league against fantasy tight ends. You mix that with what I think will be a higher target total for Zach Miller. I love him in week 14, and then he gets to come back against Green Bay, who have been very bad, almost 10 points a game given up to tight ends in week 15. So Zach Miller, Cameron Brate, I agree, those two. The Gates-Henry thing, obviously, if you got one of them, I mean, you're probably playing them.
Yeah, I would much prefer to have Gates over Henry. I think
it's so interesting, though. I mean, it's just, I don't know how it's going to evolve
long-term
after the next 3 weeks.
Dynasty, Hunter Henry is going to be a star.
Yeah, well, but I don't
but
know.
if you look at the targets over even the last few weeks and the receptions, Hunter Henry.
But he was hurt. I mean, I think that's a little bit deceiving. You said that on the show yesterday. And Hunter Henry was hurt. I mean, and again, his big production came when Gates was hurt. And so I don't think we have enough of a track record to see what he's going to be like. He came back and scored after his injury.
Okay,
so
you could say he was hurt. Okay, but in Atlanta.
He was hurt in the Denver game.
In Atlanta, before the Denver game, he had 1 reception.
Right, but the previous 4 before that was 5, 4, 3, and 6.
When you had him alone, not when Gates was there.
And I just don't think it was enough of a track record.
I think when Gates
is there. But this is why we like Brate and Miller.
It is certainly Gates. Yeah, and that's why I went Brate over these guys. But I do like Antonio Gates quite a bit. Some other guys.
I think, I got one.
Will Tye.
Will Tye. He has Dallas and Detroit in weeks 14 and 15.
Great matchups, and he is
he
all
was
alone.
Heavily targeted.
He is the tight end right now in New York. Larry Donnell has been pushed back to the side, as he should have been, because Will Tye is actually pretty darn good. They haven't too much this year, but I mean, in the Ben McAdoo system, they have used the tight end on the red zone, and they've been a very big touchdown threat. Against Dallas, against Detroit, I think Will Tye is going to be a great
Do you
play.
think if Cruz comes back, though, and it's just Shepard, Cruz, Beckham, that Tye is going to be capped out, or do you just –
No, because I still think you've got the red zone opportunities. I mean, capped, sure. I don't think he's going to go out and put up 20 points, but I think he's going to be around that 10-point number that you're kind of hoping for from a tight end.
Travis Kelce, Kyle Rudolph both have good playoff schedules. They're in the top tier. Let's flip to the other side. Look at some of the bad tight end schedules. Now, look, New England, they don't have a good schedule against tight. It doesn't matter. I mean, Rob Gronkowski, if he's on the field, he doesn't qualify as a standard tight end. So Baltimore, Denver, New York, I don't care about Gronk at all.
I want to look at Gronk's history against Baltimore. I'm going to look that up after the show, and I'll tweet that out. The only reason I say that is just because Baltimore has been historically good. Not good. They've been the best team for years now against the tight end. They almost never give it up. So there's enough matchups between Gronk and them. I want to look back and see, because that week 14, not like you're going to not play Gronk, but it's just
interesting,
yeah.
All right, Delanie Walker, though. Let's talk about this. He's been so good. He has Denver and Kansas City, two of the best teams against fantasy tight ends. Kansas City's only given up 4.33 fantasy points a game. Denver, 4.66 a game. So Delanie Walker, you go into the playoffs, and you have Denver and Kansas City. I just don't know. You hear those names on paper. I don't think there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game. I don't think you're going to get the Tennessee 47-point performance you got this last week that made Delanie Walker valuable. So right now he's the second-ranked tight end, though. So
let's put this into realistic.
And he's got that Week 13 bye.
Context.
So you're not even playing in Week 13. I think you move him right now. If you can move him, I'd move him.
If you can move him and then pick up a Cameron Brate off of waivers, if Cameron Brate's out there and you can get something for Delanie Walker, pick up Cameron Brate.
Which I think sounds terrifying for fantasy owners. But I agree with you.
You're probably going to improve your team by moving him, and then maybe improve your team in the playoffs at the position.
Because you'll get to play him against Indianapolis this week. So if you're fighting for the playoffs, that's a great matchup. But then you got Chicago in a bye, and then the two tough matchups. So Delanie Walker to me seems like somebody who you could cash in off of this humongous week he had against Green Bay with the 47 points. 90% reception rate this past week. So that might be one of the biggest tight end moves you can make right now.
Yeah, and the only other guy of note that I think sticks out a little bit would be Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham's got a great week one, and I've said it before. Week one is the most important to me.
That's what Delanie Walker just went up against Green Bay. And
yeah, Green Bay is who he plays in week one of the playoffs. That's great. But the next 2 weeks against the L.A. Rams and the Arizona Cardinals are not that good. L.A. is only averaging 5.2 fantasy points a game given up to the tight end, and Arizona only 2. I think I'm fine with Jimmy Graham in both of those matchups despite the hard. He's just been so integral to their offense now.
But it's good to know. I mean, Arizona just has not given it up. I think it has a lot to do with just the speed they have in the linebacking core. Let's transition now. Hopefully that helped you get ready. Again, we're setting the table. You pick what you want to eat. We're going to tweet out all of the different top 10 lists for each of these positions and the bottom 10 lists, so you have that information. You can find that on Twitter at the FF Ballers. Let's go ahead and preview the Thursday night game before we close out the show. New Orleans is taking on the Panthers. This is a huge divisional game. To me, if the Panthers lose this game, you can officially declare them done for the playoffs. New Orleans, heartbreaking loss, probably should be 5-4, but I guess you got to make an extra point. So this is one of the biggest over-unders we've seen on the year, 52 points. Do you buy into that, Jason, on Thursday night? And is there somebody you like especially more than anybody else tonight?
I buy in a little bit less. What we saw is earlier in the year, Cam Newton, Drew Brees, that game was electric. The shock at the time that the New Orleans Saints beat the Panthers in this divisional game, the highest, the scoring was back and forth. Cam Newton was, great, had 322 yards, 2 touchdowns. Drew Brees was amazing. But now Drew Brees goes on the road. And we've said it many times, Drew Brees at home versus Drew Brees on the road. You could still beat Carolina's
defense since the bye has been improved.
For sure. They definitely have. So I think you're going to see a little less scoring than you did the first time around. I would probably lean towards the under on this game, but I do expect there to be enough fantasy points. I love Jonathan Stewart.
Let's put you on the spot with Ingram and Hightower.
Okay. What do you want to know?
Who would you take to the prom?
If I had to ask for a date, I would ask Mark Ingram.
Okay.
I think Ingram is still going to be the starter. I he's the more talented of the two, but it is certainly a split. And honestly, I don't want
Can you
either.
start both, though, on Thursday?
No, I don't think you can start both. I would prefer to start neither. Carolina's passing defense has been awful.
Sure.
But their running defense has been pretty darn good.
Fourth best in the league. They just gave up they haven't given up a touchdown on the ground since week 4.
So now you've got Mark Ingram in a split with Hightower going up against the 4th best.
Okay. I'm going to ask you this now.
All right.
So you made your point about Hightower and Ingram. Do you start Thomas Rawls over Mark Ingram?
No.
You don't? Okay. Now, he has Philly, so they're a tough run D, too. Do you start C.J. Prosise over Mark Ingram?
Yes, I would start C.J. Prosise over Mark Ingram.
I assume in half and full?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe even in
Would
standard.
you start, let's say you're flexing Ingram or Hightower, or you have to choose Terrell Pryor against Pittsburgh?
Terrell Pryor.
Devontae Adams against Washington.
Devontae Adams.
All right, you've helped me decide my lineup this week.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, asking for a friend. But I love Jonathan Stewart in this game.
Okay.
I still like Cam. I still like
Sure.
Drew Brees. I like the passing weapons for New Orleans.
Do we give up on Fleener or Hill, or Fleener particularly? I mean, he had the 24-point game 4 weeks ago. He's been single digits for 4 straight weeks. Would you rather barf with a different tight end? I don't even know what that phrase means, but I'm trying to bring it all together here.
Yeah, I think I would probably look elsewhere. Here's the thing. I mean, we've said this time and time again, is that Fleener, like a lot of tight ends, is going to have bad games a lot. But when he explodes, it's going to be bigger. I mean, keep in mind his 8 for 97, 2 touchdown, or one of his big blow up games. That was against the Panthers. The Panthers are not good against the tight ends. So this is a game where we could see Fleener emerge again, and I hate to tell people to start him.
Right.
But I still would. I mean, I just think I always try to give the advice that I would give myself. And if I'm making the decision between a bunch of bad tight ends, and make no mistake, Fleener's been bad this year. He's
been bad to the tune of the 13th ranked tight end.
Exactly.
Just because of his 2 big games.
Because when he gives you a big game,
right,
they're monstrous.
All right, that does it for today's show. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you got that fantasy playoff energy flowing. We're excited for our listeners to bring in some Foot Clan titles. We're doing our best to help you out. And so to that end, we invite you to head over to jointhefoot.com and join our fantasy community, where you will get an extra episode of this show
every single week,
including tomorrow, when Jason and myself will be hosting the Footcast over there at jointhefoot.com. That is 100% listener supporter questions on that show.
And this just in, Andy Holloway has agreed
on the
Footcast to do the mailbag drop again.
Oh, my God.
And now that I've said it on the main show, he will do it. Congratulations to all the Foot
I can
players.
still edit this out of the show. I can still take it out. I've got the power. Mike's not here.
I know you won't.
Yeah, that's because we're verified. I can't do that. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. Don't forget to check out fantasyjocks.com.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Fantasy Footballers Podcast. Join our fantasy football community on jointhefoot.com and follow us on Twitter @TheFFBallers.